Ever wonder how a simple integration could transform your business from a basic tool into an industry game changer? Imagine if adding powerful remote access was as easy as choosing between buying a cake at the store or baking one yourself. Today, we're breaking down OEM versus SDK remote access integrations with a slice of clarity, if you will. Welcome to this first episode of RealVNC's Remote Access Redefined podcast series. I'm your host, Nick Cavalancia from Conversational Geek. And joining me today is Dom Parks, lead developer for OEM at RealVNC. Now, Dom spent years helping businesses decode complex integrations, and today he's going to unravel how OEM and SDK models can future-proof your products, simplify scalability, and keep customers hooked. Dom, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah. Hi, Nick. Good to be here. Yeah. No small
Glad
task
you're here.
there, I think.
Well, sorry, say that again?
No small task there.
No, I don't think it is. I make it sound like it's easy. It takes Dom 5 seconds. Exactly, but we know that it's not. Maybe can we start by having you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your role at VNC?
Yeah. So I'm an engineer by training and background, and I've been at RealVNC for, basically since the beginning of it being a commercial concern. And in that whole time, I've kind of been mostly on the technical side of what we call OEM. So that's basically getting RealVNC enterprise-grade screen sharing technology into our customers' products, solutions, projects, whatever makes sense. It's kind of working closely with customers, some of those things are building entire products for them. Some of them are just helping them get, the off-the-shelf software working with what they need it to work with.
Whatever's necessary, I suppose. And maybe we should talk about that first and sort of level set the audience, thinking about remote access integration and what that actually means to them, because you just kind of painted the picture of two different things. And we'll talk more in depth with when we talk about OEM and SDK. But for people that are new to all of this, what's your definition of remote access integration, and what value does it bring to businesses that are looking to utilize remote access in their products?
Yeah, it's kind of So RealVNC invented screen sharing effectively back in the 90s when it was part of AT&T Labs. And I think most people have got some experience of what that is. And usually it's in the form of an off-the-shelf product that they or their IT team are using to support them. So it'll be something like our off-the-shelf software, or be one of our competitors or one of the open source variants. But the integration and the kind of the power of that, and the value that has, is in bringing it into a use case that might be new. It might be just adding that to an existing solution, adding remote access to something that's already got a kind of presence out there in the world. So it's kind of just bringing that, adding a new dimension to what you're doing. The most obvious being like you've got a help desk team or a help desk piece of software, and you need to actually visualize what your customers are trying to tell you over the phone or via chat or whatever. So the remote access being added to that as an integrated part of that is quite a compelling, benefit to that, I think.
So I guess RealVNC got the saying that a picture with 1,000 words 30 years ago, and now you're just simply trying to bring that to everybody else.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, there's a lot of terms that even I've thrown out. We talked about remote access integration. I've used the terms OEM and SDK integrations, and I'm assuming that the people that are listening today have some idea of certainly what those acronyms mean. We all know that in tech there's way too many TLAs, 3-letter acronyms, and we're keeping the idea going today with OEM, original equipment manufacturer, and SDK, software development kit, and so on. But you've got these two different integrations here. Could you talk a little bit about the difference, maybe just even from RealVNC's perspective, or even from the customer's perspective? What is the difference and how they benefit to each other? And I use that sort of cake analogy, and I threw that in the beginning here because I know that your team uses that cake analogy. So feel free to, to spread some of that in if you feel like that's necessary as well. So what's the difference between OEM and SDK from your perspective?
Yeah. So kind of OEM's the umbrella, and then I think if it's a straight OEM integration, then it's our off-the-shelf product. But yeah, one of our sales support execs came up with the cake analogy, at least for use with us. And that's basically, if you're thinking about our off-the-shelf product, which is Connect, that's kind of like your ready-made cake that you just go into the bakery and pick up and take away. And it's kind of, it is what it is. You can see what it is already, and it's quite easy to visualize because it's a real thing. And you can just pick that up, drop it into your meal in the cake analogy, right? Perhaps taking that a bit too far. So that's the the kind of off the shelf side of things, and the integration there is kind of defined by the parameters of the application. It's fairly it's fairly I wouldn't say limited,
well
but it's
defined.
got its limitations. Yeah, well defined.
Yeah.
The SDK is, so if you can imagine, you've got the same ingredients, or at least most of the same ingredients. It's a toolkit effectively rather than ingredients, but it's kind of ready to be baked in whatever way you need. It doesn't have the icing on the top, so there's no like branding. There's no UI. You can replace all those bits. But it's taking that core screen sharing technology and giving it a kind of API wrapper, and allowing you to really twist that metaphor and bake that into a cake of your own
or a set of brownies, or maybe cupcakes, or
anything you like, almost. Yeah.
Kind of, yeah. I saw the other day on the topic of cake, someone on TikTok said you just use the cake mix, an egg, and then condensed milk. That's it, and you get the best cake ever. So it's mixing it up however you want, and it sort of applies here, I think, in some ways, because I think that's what you're saying is use the bits you want. Don't use the whole thing. Use whatever kind of interface or whatever makes sense to you, the functionality and the features. Is there a particular kind of business that is a really ideal fit for OEM integration versus SDK, and what are the criteria there?
Yeah, it's kind of more, I wouldn't say type of business or even business case. It's more like a kind of circumstantial thing. It's for some companies and some teams and some projects, it's going to make sense to take an off-the-shelf component and slot it into what you've already got, and kind of work with us to figure out the best ways to get that to suit your use case. In some cases, you're going to, your company or your business case or your project is going to have like certain things that you just can't compromise on, that you need to take full control over. And that might be branding, it might be the seamlessness of the integration, or it might be some particular functionality that you need that just isn't there in Connect. So I wouldn't say it's so much of a type of business, because we see a really wide range of different use cases for both types of integration, both types of software. So yeah.
I'm also thinking that it just sort of depends on the partner's needs. If they're more like, no, we really want to build something ourselves. We have some very specific use cases and feature sets we want to take advantage of, and there's things we don't want to see. You mentioned even like branding or whatever the case is, or it might just be they want to get file transfer capabilities for the sake of conversation, as opposed to, we don't need that whole remote access thing. That's not even it for us. We just want to be able to send files somewhere. And so they actually need and want to build it themselves, as opposed to another company that says, we just really feel like we should be including some remote access in here. And if we could get something off the shelf and plug it in, that'd be a lot easier. I mean, that you agree?
Yeah, I think so. And also there's kind of the separator that brings you more to the SDK, other than, you want full control and you want to really customize stuff, is you might have a use case or a device, say, that you want to support that isn't a standard desktop. It isn't just, I've got a PC, I want to talk to my VP of whatever's laptop. It's not just that use case, it's something more than that. So maybe it's a specific product like a KVM switch. So you can imagine adding a VNC server to that and remoting into that to act as a kind of hardware version of our software. Or maybe you've got an Android application that you want to specifically support that application that your customer is using. Connect isn't going to help you there, or it could, but it's not going to help you as seamlessly as if you integrated the SDK directly into that application and just supported your own set of stuff exclusively.
So the seamlessness seems like one of the criteria that someone might want to consider. There's also certainly complexity. If you go the SDK route, there's a lot more work. Someone's going to have to code it themselves and take advantage of the features and functionality that you have that they want. But then there's also this sort of time to market aspect, I think. And certainly the OEM makes sense. Anybody would agree. you going back to the cake analogy, OEM being the store-bought cake or the bakery-bought cake, it's really fast to get the cake. You walk in, 5 minutes later, you walk out, you got a cake. So the OEM integration obviously accelerates time to market. But I think it's still worth having a discussion quickly.
Yeah.
When an organization's looking to leverage your remote access OEM integration, how complex is that? What kind of time frame does that take? Can you paint a picture of that?
Yeah, I can try to. So it does depend. Again, it still depends a bit on the use case and the environment that you're trying to push this into. And I think one thing I would say is that as soon as the more complexity you try to add to an integration with off-the-shelf software, the more you're leaning towards needing an SDK solution instead of an off-the-shelf solution, and that's kind of like that's your limiting factor of how complex and how time-consuming that integration ought to be. As soon as it's getting beyond a fairly quick integration, you've probably got the wrong product. But yeah, so as I've already kind of hinted at, it's off the shelf. It's known. It's a product that you probably, if you are coming to us for an OEM type deal on that, you've already used it yourselves, maybe in your company, maybe you've tried it out, you've trialed it, you've made a proof of concept perhaps with it, and you can see where the integration points are, because they're things like scripting for launching the viewer or launching a session to remotely support something. Their integration points like deploying out the software to devices, and they're modifying parameters to precisely suit what you need the session to do. Like, can we share the screen without a user being there? Can we share the screen and control it? Can we, all these sorts of things that you might want to tailor just by parameters. So it's basically setting values and deploying those out to devices.
It's interesting. It
yeah.
sounds like, and I'm jumping ahead because we really haven't talked much about the SDK integration, but it sounds like the OEM integration is more about like how you want to use it, as opposed to the SD integration, I'm going to guess, is more like, what do you want to use? And it's far more detailed. Does that sound about right?
It can be. It certainly can be, yeah. So I think with Connect, which is, that's our off-the-shelf product, you are buying into that as a service effectively. So you get the clients for your desktop and mobile devices. You get the authentication and login for your account, for your subscription, and your users get added in the way that we've decided. So it's all there, it's all fixed, it's quite flexible, but it's what we've decided. So that might not suit a lot of use cases where someone wants to do something that's much more about supporting their users on their devices or in their particular solution. So I'd say that the SDK, whilst, you can definitely take bits of it and not use other bits of it much more easily than you could with Connect. It's kind of wider than just that. It's also,
yeah. Okay, back to just finishing up OEM integration real quick. Can you give us an example of like a really successful OEM integration and what that looks like?
Yeah, so we have a customer in the medical industry. Not sure I'm allowed to say their name, but I think I am. So Biotronic, they've built Connect into a use case that they had for supporting their, effectively they make cardiac implants that monitor things. I think they're like pacemakers and heart monitors and things like that. And they have technicians who program those monitors with the patient in situ, basically. And they needed a way to support not the devices themselves, but actually the probably what are laptops and PCs that are used to program those devices. And they supply those PCs as a product from their own stock, and they've installed Connect on there. They've tailored the whole kind of end-to-end use of Connect to fit in with that, so that they can offer support directly to those programming devices and to the technicians there, and so that they can also prevent having to send people out to do that, and also to get access to things like log files very quickly, so they can exactly see what's going on. And it's just a massive time-saving, massive resource and effort-saving initiative for them, and I think it's worked out quite well. And I think they're gradually expanding into having that. So it's not just that they're supporting their own products; they're also allowing their customers to kind of look at those things too, and kind of remote in from other locations. So a GP or a doctor might want to remote into those sorts of devices if that's part of their specialism.
That's a great example. Maybe we shift gears and talk about SDK integration. I didn't just insinuate. I actually stated it's maybe more about what parts they want to use, and you obviously said it's a bit more than that. And SDK tends to be more preferred by businesses that want more control. They want to have a customized solution. They don't want just what's off the shelf. Again, they want to take the cake ingredients and bake something themselves and maybe use a dash of condensed milk instead. So can you talk a little bit about how the SDK offers some flexibility? I mean, there's a lot of flexibility, obviously, in the OEM too. You talked about that, but it offers more flexibility for customizations for clients that want to go that route.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, like I said, it's a toolkit of parts. It's kind of at the most basic level, it's a set of libraries and samples and documentation and kind of bindings for specific languages that allows you to just kind of build a remote control, remote access, connectivity platform into your product or into your solution or whatever that might be. And yeah, it's got a load of components in it which are kind of targeted at specific platforms. There are languages for, say, Android and Python and C#. So it's really some of that stuff's going to be more or less useful depending on what you're trying to build and what your platforms are. But the main real benefit and strengths of all of that is that it's a direct programmatic interface that allows you to control the session that you're trying to establish, the support session or the remote control session. You can set the parameters that you need to do with that. You can programmatically control basically all the details of that, rather than doing something at arm's reach with a script or with a command line thing that's launching another bit of software. It's all very much more integratable and integrated into whatever you want to do. If you wanted to, you could actually build something very similar to off-the-shelf product with this. You could build up a UI, build up all the features that you need. But I think the strength of it is, and what we see it used for, is more about bringing it into something else. So it's that programmatic interface that gives it its strength. But the stuff that you can do with it, apart from just controlling the session and starting a session, stopping a session, setting the user credentials and things like that, you can send whatever data you like between two endpoints. So you've got this connection you've made with Connect, with the off-the-shelf stuff. You get what you're given there. You can see the screen and you can control the mouse and keyboard and some other stuff. With the SDK, you can send arbitrary data, so you could get telemetry of that same channel. You could get whatever you need to do to send. You could send a script over to run it on the other side. You could grab something from one side, bring it to the other. So that gives you a lot more flexibility too. And we also have a feature in the SDK that's not there in the off-the-shelf product yet, which is the ability to draw on the screen, because we found actually in a lot of the use cases we were integrating with help desk type tools that already existed, but didn't have this kind of remote support feature. And one of the key use cases there was education. So what we've enabled is its ability for the technician, for the customer support rep to say, I could fix this for you, but actually I think it would be better if you tried to fix it yourself. Here's what you need to click, and there's a circle on the screen, the icon or the button that the customer needs to click, and then that solves that problem. So that's quite a powerful feature that we've added there as well. But yeah, it kind of gives you the flexibility to build up as little or as much as you want in terms of user interface, in terms of complexity, connectivity. So it could be anything. You could be just supporting a single fixed device on LAN. You've got a particular device you need to remote into another location. You're kind of just bringing it to another place, or to building a full cloud support solution that you just happen to need.
And on the same vein that I asked around the OEM, give maybe a specific customer example where integrating remote access via the SDK transform their product, solve the problem, something along those lines for one of the customers you have?
Yeah, it's. I think in this case, I probably can't mention specific customers. I think we've got a lot of kind of leaning into the the example I gave just there, where you've got a device that you want to bring into another location. We've got a lot of use cases which are kind of what I call cutting the wire. So there's a device somewhere important. One example is on a ship. There's a bank of radar display screens or sonar display screens, and they want to bring those from one location on the vessel to another location on the vessel. And you can do that obviously with a wired connection. Wireless probably isn't necessarily the way you're going to do that, but you could do that with literal HDMI wires or USB or whatever. But a lot of cases, people want to be more flexible about that. They want to be able to put a PC somewhere else or something like a PC and bring that display to another location. And that's been quite a popular use case for the SDK because it's a cut down set of tools. You can bring in exactly what you need. You're getting very real-time data with the SDK. The way the protocol works, it's very focused on kind of real-time performance and visual acuity of the solution, so you're not losing any pixels if you don't want to. But then it's also got that flexibility to bring that display. So in the ship example, in the maritime example, you bring that display to, say, from the bridge to another location on the ship, but also to the Coast Guard, to the HQ somewhere. You can bring that display there. So it can be monitored kind of in both ways with the same solution with no real massive overhead in terms of development or complexity of what you're doing with the connectivity, because the protocol itself will adapt to pretty much whatever bandwidth and latency you throw at it. So that can be a ship via satellite or just within a LAN. So yeah, another use case is you have a conference room solution, and that's kind of it's a set of tools like a screen and a webcam and recording software sometimes and hardware. You've got a tablet on the desk in the conference room to control the Teams session or the Zoom session. Behind the scenes, there's a big PC that's actually doing all the networking and doing all the configuration. One use case we've seen is that people want to bring the display from that screen over to this tablet without having to have wires everywhere, without having to have HDMI leads and USB leads, which are kind of the standard way to do that. So that's been a fairly major case there. And yeah, bringing a desktop into a novel environment too. So we have a customer working in the VR shared workspace area, and then Meta's been investing a lot of money into that area recently. And they've taken the SDK into that world. So they use what we call the viewer side of the SDK to build a screen inside the shared workspace. They bring the keyboard into that workspace as well, and they allow someone in VR workspace to basically look at their colleague who's also in that shared workspace and type on their keyboard and look at their screen as if they were next to them in the office. So that's quite a compelling use case if you want to work in a VR world. And again,
it does paints a picture though between the two. I mean, one is you just want to plug into an existing remote access solution. The other one might be you just want to have a screen that's embedded inside of some other application and has a certain purpose to view something or whatever. And that makes a lot of sense here. Let's do this. I think you've painted a really good picture of OEM and SDK remote access integrations. And so I feel like the audience at this point should have, those of you listening, should have some kind of sense of what we're dealing with now. And so the question I'm really wondering, Dom, is what's the first step that somebody listening, if there's a company that wants to go down either of the routes, and you maybe have to cover each one independently, I'm not sure, but what's the first step they should go through or go to in order to start down the path of either OEM or SDK remote access integration?
Yeah. So the kind of obvious answer to that would be talk to us. But actually, the kind of
maybe
the realistic answer is in most cases people are going to have an idea of what they want to build. They know what remote access is, and they're going to start to think about what they want to achieve. Have that use case in mind. Think about whether it needs custom development. I know that's like 3 or 4 steps now, but yeah, I think it's going to be try to crystallize in your mind what you want to actually achieve with this, and then the decision point between the two, whether it's connect or or SDK might need a conversation with us. It might need it might mostly need a kind of evaluation on the customer's part to see, can we work within the bounds of the software as a service product, or do we need to do something that steps out of that? Do we need control over where the networking goes? Do we need to keep this entirely on-prem? Do we need to do those sorts of things? So those sorts of questions they need to be thinking about, and how much probably the fundamental thing is how much ownership do they want over this solution? It's potentially integrated into whatever products they're making, whether it's Connect or it's SDK. So how much ownership do they want to take over that?
Excellent. And then I want to kind of sum up this a little bit in terms of the process and what's involved. Because I think you've done a really good job of painting a picture. We talked about what each one is and talking about customer examples and that sort of thing. If we were going to succinctly summarize what's involved in each process, I'm going to throw something out at you because it sounds like, from my perspective, I've done a very small amount of development work, but have worked in a bunch of software companies previously, so I know it's involved with development. The OEM integration feels like it's a minimal amount of development, maybe calling some scripts or a command line or something to then launch Connect on your end, and then they can gain access to something. And so it's a very small amount of work that has to be done in comparison to those wanting to use the SDK. Again, to your point, they probably know what they already want to do. It's a spectrum of work depending on what it is they're trying to accomplish. And it's a lot more development work in order to achieve that. Is that fair? And can you succinctly maybe add some context to anything that I missed about what each looks like?
No, I think that's right. I think, I was kind of starting to go down that when you asked for just that first step, because I'm always kind of thinking a few steps down the line. But I think the main thing for the SDK is going to be, so proof of concept is probably the main task that we're trying to differentiate here. And the proof of concept on Connect is you get a trial of Connect. You can do that with our help or without, and you can see all of the parameters and all of the things that you can customize are laid out there for you within that bit of software, and you can take that, run with it, see how it goes. The SDK, I think you're definitely going to be talking to us if you're doing a trial of that. It's got really good samples and really good documentation that allow you to get going with it. But the POC is going to be a bit more involved. It's going to be a bit of a case of let's get it running on our platform with our whatever our hardware might be or whatever our environment might be. So giving that a go. It's figuring out what you want to integrate with and what languages you need to develop there, whether the SDK supports them. Hopefully it does. It probably does. And then, it's trying to figure out where those things fit. And I always try and propose a kind of start simple process to that. So you can start with what we've already offered you in terms of the samples that we've got. So build up these basic samples, make a connection, add in complexity over time, and see at what point you need to get to say we've reached the proof of concept stage, we're happy with that. We've reached the MVP stage, we're happy with that, and we've gone to market with it. And I think all those things can happen kind of in a process of, from talking to us to getting it out to the public.
Wonderful. There's another aspect of this that we haven't talked about that I think is really important. Having been in cybersecurity for many, many years myself, anytime remote access is involved, there's a risk that's created, right? Because you're giving someone access to some other resource, some other system, somewhere else that they wouldn't normally be able to physically access, and now they can logically gain access to it and so on. And so security becomes this really important consideration when you're thinking about integrating remote access. And I guess the question I would have here is, what should a business be thinking about when they're considering this? I mean, I say this kind of in the mindset of, if a company has figured out we want to do a remote access integration, and now they're looking for various partners, and they try to determine which of the partners do we put on the short list and who do we select and go with ultimately, what should they be thinking about from the security standpoint? I've got a couple of things in my head, but I really want to hear from you first, because you're the expert and have done this a million times. So what's your thought there? What should they really be focused on to make sure they're picking the right solution?
Yeah. So when I hear that question, my technical technical side of my brain says, you should be looking at what the encryption settings are, what's available in the encryption. The fact that the SDK and connector are kind of secure by default and secure by design and all these sorts of things. But I think actually the real thing that a company needs to be thinking about when they're evaluating any kind of remote access software is, what's the track record of the company that makes that software? Have they had any breaches, data breaches, problems of that sort? Have they got the right sort of certification for the use case? Can they support ISO 27001? Sorry. Has their ecosystem, has their software been audited by an external third party? And I think you could probably tell I'm biased there, because all of those things I think we can answer yes. We've done a good job there. We've been audited. We've got the security kind of focus. I think security for RealVNC is the defining reason why it exists as a company, because there was the open source VNC. RealVNC was an effort to make that into a secure enterprise grade alternative, or evolution. So yeah, I think it's kind of part of the kind of DNA of the company. So yeah, I'd say look at those things, and then the technical side of it. Yeah, both Connect and SDK are going to give you the kind of tools to hopefully by default be secure, but equally you can go further. You can take things further. You can build your own like security steps, mechanisms. You can leverage the verification that we already have for the endpoints, and you can run with it basically.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned the third-party validation, because for those of you listening or watching, depending on what platform you're using when you see this or hear this, is the idea that when you're integrating a remote access solution into your product, you're in essence embedding a part of a supply chain directly into your product. And if the supply chain, if those who've been paying attention at all to cybersecurity, looking at supply chain attacks, you've had a number of vendors that basically are providing services like, let's say it's a security product. I don't want to mention any names or bash any company where they've been a victim, but it's like, take a security product that's embedded on every single endpoint. And if that security product was compromised, which we've had a couple of those over the last number of years, the threat actors were able to gain access to every single endpoint on every single customer that was using that product until it got patched and so on and so forth. And so coming back to you, Dom, I love that you're talking about the track record, the third-party certifications, those kind of things, because the thought process, especially for those of you listening or watching that are in development where maybe you don't have advanced DevSecOps type processes, or maybe your head just isn't really concerned about security. You're more worried about functionality and solving the actual problems that need to be solved in order to make your product functional and productive for the user. Knowing that security part is already taken care of is a big deal, just so that you don't have to worry about it as much, and you know that it's not going to become a risk for your organization here. The last two questions I have here are sort of kind of maybe some summary questions, if you will, to kind of tie all this together here. Now, you've worked on many, many, many integrations, tons of SDK related ones, and more so than the OEM, only because that's simpler to do. What is like one aspect that businesses often overlook when it comes to going down the path of SDK? And also I'll add to that, where do they make the mistake? Was the mistake made like they didn't do the diligence and they chose SDK when they really should have just gone OEM, or they didn't look at all the feature sets and they started developing before they really knew what they're doing? I mean, where in the process were they actually making the mistake? So what are they overlooking, and when should they have actually probably taken a second look to make sure they didn't make that mistake?
Yeah. Good question. So I would say of the customers I've worked with, there isn't a typical mistake or a typical place. There's nothing really that I could say that we're seeing this a lot. There's a lot of people doing, making the wrong decisions here, or kind of finding that they've chosen the wrong product. But what I would say is that, and it might be because I'm a bit biased towards the SDK because that's where my expertise has been. But I do, so it kind of goes back to the earlier point about whether you should choose Connect or you should choose the SDK. And I think sometimes people try to fight with the off-the-shelf software and the parameters of that, the kind of limitations. I wouldn't really call them limitations, but they're trying to fit it into an SDK shaped hole, and actually they've probably spent more time trying to solve those problems, and we've helped them as well, trying to solve those problems, trying to fit that into the use case that could have been better spent building a very much more custom solution that would suit them 100% down to the ground. I think some of that comes from they've come to this, we don't have the dev resource, we don't have the time to build this, or we don't want to own this, and sort of thing. So those are understandable things, that can be a mistake sometimes. I think, I mean, in an ideal world, everyone would want the SDK in a kind of Connect shape. So it's kind of, it does exactly what we want. We can just slot it in, and it's ready to go. But from what I've seen, it's more common that people will try to stick with the off-the-shelf thing, and would actually have benefited from taking a step back and looking at the SDK. But I think overall, the process, especially with the SDK projects and the SDK customers, it's typically a very carefully considered process on the part of the customer. I don't think we have very many people who go, oh, there's an SDK, I'll download that and give it a go and buy it immediately. It's usually a fairly long process just to think, is this going to fit with us? Do we like these guys? Because they're coming up with ideas, they're doing due diligence, they're probably thinking about some of those things like security reviews that we've published, and they're allocating developer time potentially. They're maybe doing a proof of concept, and it's all heading towards a very long-term partnership. So typically there isn't a typical sort of stumbling block that they hit that I would say be shared, because most people are doing this for the long term. They've come at this, and they're not going to overlook small things or even big things that would trip them up. So a bit of a circular answer, I think, not quite.
And that's okay. No, I think it's good for them to see all the perspectives, and even if it comes around full circle, that's actually good. Last question, super easy, but just what's one key takeaway about remote access integration that you want the audience to leave with today, that they make sure that they know?
I think it's what we've discussed throughout. It's kind of it's a benefit. It would be a benefit to bring this into your own solution, your own product, because you get that benefit of just immediacy, of being able to see what your customers are seeing, of cutting those wires, whatever it may be. It's just that kind of major value add that I think it can bring to all sorts of solutions.
That's excellent. Excellent. Well, that's all the time that we do have today. Just want to thank all you for listening today. If you'd like more information on RealVNC and their OEM program, you can visit realvnc.com/OEM. Nice and easy there. Do remember, this is the first in a 6-part series, so be on the lookout for future podcast episodes on your choice of podcast platform. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you all on the next one.